Because what I learned in the early days of my event production is if you don't talk about all of these things at the very beginning, you have what I call the V8 moment, and that's not a good thing. Where you gotta smack your head and say, oh, you know what we should have done? And at the end of the event, the question is, how will we know if it worked?
As a leader, and especially in this particular case, leading people that, one, don't work for you, and people that have a myriad of personalities. What would your advice be to our listeners on how to lead a diverse team?
You know, people are more alike than they're different. And everybody wants to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. Help people feel and understand where they fit in the larger tapestry, if you will.
One of the things she said is communication. You always want to make sure that you've got communication flowing constantly. She couldn't run an event for the Dalai Lama and plan it for months without consistently communicating with people. The other thing she said is the ability to pivot, right? You've got to be flexible enough to know nothing in life is permanent. It's all going to change. What's one of the things that you do with a process once something goes sideways? Can you explain to our listeners how you take advantage of that?
The most important thing to remember for myself and to communicate to the team, when something goes sideways, that's a breakdown of process. That's not a person problem.
What would your advice be to Colleen, to leaders, so that they can have that wisdom of patience?
The key to not losing the will and the interest to go back to that vision. If there's a secret to success of managing volunteers, I think one of the worst things we can do is think, well, I already know everything there is to know about that.
Colleen, you've got 24 hours to live. You're going to die at this time tomorrow. What's the one thing, what's the most important thing that you'd like to share with all of humanity for eternity about being an event producer?
Welcome to the Leadership in Love podcast. We will cover leadership, mindset, personal development, and sales and marketing. You will experience thought-provoking conversations with both nationally and internationally recognized leaders. Our goal is to inspire you and deliver actionable items that you can implement that are going to help you accelerate your growth. Get ready to discover the magic and the power when you lead with love.
So, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Leadership in Love. I am really, really excited today because I've got a very special guest, a dear friend of mine, Colleen, and she's just amazing. Not only does she have a degree in marketing, but she owns her own company called Orchestrate, and it's really cool branding because it ends with an 8, Orchestrate, and she's an event producer, a specialist at that. She actually did a huge event when the Dalai Lama came and visited. And I'll let her talk about that a little bit more. But the other thing that I think is so fascinating is there are very few people I cross paths with in life that are so well-rounded and so well-versed. And Colleen is one of those people. She can talk about a myriad of topics with great intelligence, and she's funny. And one of the things that I thought was so cool when we first met, she knew what a Stratocaster was. For those of you that are not musicians or guitar players, a Stratocaster is a Fender Stratocaster, one of Leo Fender's genius pieces of works that he built in the 50s and designed, and they haven't been able to improve since. Anyways, I'm not going to go down the guitar rabbit hole. But Colleen, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Louie. You know, I have to say, who among us hasn't thought to themselves, you know, I should do a podcast? Everybody has an idea of, you know, that looks like fun and I should really do it, but you are doing it. And Oprah says love is in the details, and you are definitely pouring love into this undertaking, and your intentions are to share leadership and love with all of us, and I predict great things. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your kind words. I'm humbled, especially, again, like I said, you're one of the most well-rounded people I've ever crossed paths with. And I'd like to add to that, she's right now in the middle just so you listeners have an idea of how skilled and talented she is. She's in the middle of building, literally, she's the GC, the general contractor, and the laborer. She's building a tiny house in her yard in Kentucky, outside her other house, and she's nailing, she's pounding, she's painting, she's measuring, she's hanging pocket doors, she's doing all that stuff. So, Colleen, I'd like to start really in your sweet spot, event producing. So, even though you've got a degree in marketing, you've morphed into event producing. What was it that made you make that transition?
You know, I feel like in some ways, I found it later in life, but my actual calling and the skill set that I developed in marketing, I found the best execution of it, which is, event production kind of brings together so many different skill sets. And the logo for my business, the 8 in the orchestrate, is like the conductor of an orchestra. And I feel like that's what an event producer does. So like a conductor might know how to play the violin, but he's not the best violinist in the world. He needs to know a little bit about every instrument. And I feel like that's what an event producer does. I have to understand the technical part, the food and beverage, the venue, the lighting, all of these different disciplines and skill sets. I don't need to be the master of any of those, but I need to understand enough about what each discipline does and how they interact with all the other disciplines. You mentioned the tiny house. It's a very similar skill set to a general contractor, actually. And so I feel like, my ability to kind of look out ahead and look at the vision of what the big picture is, and then get down into the nitty gritty and do everything in between, and be the center of that wheel that involves all the disciplines. So I feel like that's the skill, if there is a master skill of being an event producer, that I bring to that party. And once I discovered that just kind of lit me up. And I thought, I really love this. I love the left brain, right brain part of it, the creative part of it, the spreadsheets. I mean, there's really nothing about event production that I don't love. So I just kind of gravitated more and more in that direction.
That's awesome. So again, for your listeners, I want you to catch what she loves what she does. And she loves that she's having to work both sides of her brain, the creative part and the analytical part of it, which is really fascinating because through our conversations, Colleen, you're very good at both of those. You're very creative and you have that attention to detail. The next question I'd like to ask you is, who are events for?
Well, that's up to the person or organization throwing the event. There's an event for anybody out there, but I think that's one of the really important questions that I challenge people to do early on when Stephen Covey says you begin with the end in mind. I'm probably the only event producer in the world who will try my best to talk people out of having an event, because what I find is that a lot of times they see the event as the strategy when it's really a tactic. So
I'm sorry to interrupt. Please repeat that for our audience. That's gold, my friend. Please repeat that for our audience.
Right. Well, the way it works in the perfect world is you have your vision and then you have your objectives, and those are SMART objectives. And I won't go into that too deep, but you can Google that, SMART objectives.
Right.
And then you have your strategies, and then you have your tactics. And the tactics are, we're going to do this kind of event in this venue, and we're going to invite these people. Those are all tactics. And in my experience, people want to skip to that stage. They think, let's have an event, or let's have a party, or, and what I usually say is, okay, let's reel it way back. Let's go back to the beginning and say, what's the vision? So are we here to raise money? Are we here to educate? Are we here to have fun? Like, why are we doing this? Why are we even thinking of having an event? And if you get clear on that, a lot of the questions and the decisions that you have to make later on in the process become really easy, because you just go back to, why are we doing this? And that will help you decide, should we be spending money on this or that? For example, should we be offering 3 entrees at this dinner? Well, why are we having this dinner? If it's to raise money, maybe 1 entree is plenty, so it just really simplifies a lot of the decision making.
So for those of you that are listening, and if those that are watching, the reason why I pumped both my fists in the air and got so excited was I just did my first solo episode for the podcast, and it dropped today. And the 3 things I talked about were core values, mission statement, and vision statement. And Colleen had no knowledge of that, but she just lined it up perfectly, because to have a great event, you're absolutely right. You have to have that vision of what's it going to do, right? What do we want it, not only what do we want it to look like, but what's it going to accomplish? And is that in alignment with getting us to where we want to go? What's one of the things that you do when somebody comes to you and they say, hey, Colleen, I want to produce this event. What's some of the first steps that you do for them to help make that successful?
Well, I would go back to the beginning and I would say, okay, so why are you thinking of doing an event? And what is your goal? What is your vision? And, assuming we get past that stage and we really decide, no, this is what we want to do. We do want to have an event. Then, you go, I have actually an 8-step questionnaire. 8 is kind of the key number there. And we walk through such detail you would not believe. And some of it is really not applicable in any given scenario. But what I've done is I've gathered this all in one place. So by the time we go through this questionnaire, and each of the 8 parts has many sub parts, we really get clear on, who our target market is, what kind of entertainment we want to have, what kind of technical, how high tech is it going to be? Are we going to have PowerPoints? Are we going to have videos? All down to, are we having online registration? How are we ticketing? I mean, really discuss all of that up front. Because what I learned in the early days of my event production is if you don't talk about all of these things at the very beginning, you have what I call the V8 moment, and that's not a good thing, where you've got to smack your head and say, oh, you know what we should have done? And that is the worst feeling because it's a missed opportunity. And usually in a situation like this, it also means you've spent money on something that you shouldn't have. You've wasted resources because you weren't heading in the right direction. So we try to avoid that, and we try to make sure that we're clear from the very beginning where we're headed. And at the end of the event, the question is, how will we know if it worked? And if we haven't been clear setting our objectives up front, then it's all loosey-goosey, and we can say, well, that was great, but was it really? Do we know that we accomplished what we set out to do? We're kind of holding our own feet to the fire.
Yeah, I love that. So Colleen's touched on a couple of things, and I don't want you guys to miss it. One of the things, and I would highly recommend you go check out her website, if for no other reason, to check out her logo. Her logo is nothing short of brilliant, and she's tied it to her messaging today. So it's the figure 8, the number 8, and it does look like an orchestrator with like the little baton in their hand as the figure 8. And everything she's saying lines up to that, as she's the director of this orchestra. The food, the entertainment, the tickets, the lighting, the tables, the table, all those details that most people don't ever think about when you walk into an event. So I want you to check out her logo because it's nothing short of brilliant, especially the way she just ties it to her marketing and her message on how she does or runs an event. Colleen, I don't want to pass this opportunity up to ask you, as a leader, and especially in this particular case, leading people that, one, don't work for you. In some way you do. They're subcontractors. You're hiring them. But people that really don't work for you, and people that have a myriad of personalities, which is pretty much a business owner today anyway, right? You've got young people, old people, all kinds of races and religions and political beliefs and, piercings and hair colors, and the list goes on and on. What would your advice be to our listeners on how to lead a diverse team?
It's really interesting because I guess the best example I can come up with of something that I did lead a very diverse group of people was the Dalai Lama event, because we had several audiences, we had lots of religious people. We had 20 mayors from different cities in the US. So we had everything from, CEOs to volunteers to people that had come from other states to come to this event. We had American Sign Language. So we had people that, were hearing impaired, every possible audience that you could imagine, that all came together for this event. And, I think it comes back to something that I know you talk a lot about in this podcast and just part of the Louie Sharp brand, if you will, which is, people are more alike than they're different. And everybody wants to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Okay, stop. Can I interrupt? I'm sorry. Can I interrupt you? Can you please repeat that? If you're leading a team, an organization, or company, please pay really close attention to what Colleen just said and is going to repeat. Go ahead and repeat that, please.
But just remember that people are more alike than they're different. And one of the core desires that everybody has is that they want to be some part of something bigger than themselves. So, with the Dalai Lama event in particular, we had 200 volunteers. I mean, that's crazy. to have 200 people volunteer, and I'm not talking about showing up for an hour or two. I'm talking about weeks and months of work on this event for no pay. Well, why would somebody do that? Because, and they're not all Buddhist, by the way, but it was part of a community effort. Louisville positioned itself as the most compassionate city in America. People wanted to be part of that vision, right? So whether it's something like that, or maybe it's a for-profit event, and I'm hiring a lighting designer, or I'm hiring a caterer, I think it's really important to explain to them, here's why we're doing this event. Get them to buy into the vision and the mission that we have for this event. So they're not just, selling food. Or, I mean, that's what they do, right? That's what their business is. But I hope to have them feel like they're part of our mission as an organization, that they understand here's how they fit into the larger scheme of this event. So they're not just showing up to do their job, but I'm introducing them, first of all, to other people in the community who are business people who they may work with again. They might hire each other for different events or refer each other for different events. So it's not just you show up, you do your work, you get paid. But, I like to feel that when people work with me on an event, they feel like they're part of a larger undertaking. They get, invited to, whether it's the pre-event, the post-event, they're part of that community, along with volunteers and sponsors. And, Louisville is, I think, about 2 million people. It's not a small town, but it can feel like a small town if you choose to involve yourself with organizations and groups that share your values. So, I look at it that way. And whether it's the Dalai Lama event or a corporate event or an educational event, help people feel and understand where they fit in the larger tapestry, if you will, of this event and this undertaking.
That's awesome. Thank you. What would your recommendation be for leaders? So that's powerful that you bring them in and tie them to the vision. Like I love that word tapestry, right? Because every little piece makes the beautiful picture. I love that word. That's a great word. What would your recommendation or your advice and counsel be for people to deal with the specific, like, for example, I play in some bands. Entertainers can be really pretty difficult to work with, right? Whereas the people hauling the trash out of the event may be so laid back that they're completely opposite of the entertainer who's got that big ego and all that stuff. What would your advice be to leaders on how to handle those different personalities?
Well, I guess the most important thing is to kind of check your own ego. If I'm the event producer and I show up like I'm the diva, or I think that I'm the important person in the room, then I'm kind of encouraging that in other people. I guess the way I try to encourage people to behave is we're all subservient to the vision of this event. We're all here to serve the vision and the mission of this organization, right? And that includes me, that includes the talent. I always love that word. It's like, we call some people the talent, like the rest of us don't have any talent, right?
Right.
Or the guy that's hauling out the trash. I mean, even the volunteers, on some level, they're the bottom of the totem pole, but I elevate them to the top, right? And I say, if you're here and you're not getting paid, well, you really are a rock star, So I think we have to set that example and really encourage, good communication. And again, if we all understand, and we're all communicating of how this all fits together, then it kind of, again, begin with the end in mind. We set the stage for the behavior and the culture that we want to cultivate. So if people understand from the beginning, oh, here's what we're doing here. Here's how this is going to go down. And if something goes wrong, that is a great opportunity. Rahm Emanuel, who was the chief of staff under Barack Obama, said, never let a good crisis go to waste. I love that, because when something goes wrong, it's kind of like when your kid falls on the playground and they look at you like, how are we doing? Should I be crying right now? Right. Everyone looks at the producer like, oh my God, what does this mean? And it's my job to be calm and not be the stereotypical, everyone thinks the event producer is the crazy person with the clipboard. That's not at all what my job is. My job is to inspire confidence and to have a plan for when this happens, because inevitably something will go wrong. And so the last thing I would ever do is point a finger or throw somebody under the bus. If everybody knows that when things go wrong, that's just an opportunity for us to learn something and us to demonstrate our pivoting skills. That's the most important skill as an event producer, is to be able to pivot on the fly and make it look like that was your plan all along.
So, Colleen, you just dropped a gold mine. You blew right by golden nuggets. You just dropped a gold mine. So I want to make sure the audience catches it. First, and Colleen and I have had this conversation as a side conversation before we got on the call, and just in conversation. We didn't know that we were going to lead to this podcast. But she said something critical. When something goes sideways, it's the perfect opportunity to show, one, the world who you are as a leader. You remain calm. Two, it gives you an opportunity, especially if you screw up with a client, it's the perfect opportunity to cement that client to your business, your organization permanently, the way you handle that. Again, I want the audience to catch, you just laid a plethora of intelligence there. One of the things she said is communication. You always want to make sure that you've got communication flowing constantly. She couldn't run an event for the Dalai Lama and plan it for months without consistently communicating with people. The other thing she said is the ability to pivot, right? You've got to be flexible enough to know that nothing in life is permanent. It's all going to change. One of the things I'd like you to talk about now is how and what do you do as a leader and as this event producer of, and it was a big deal, right? Everybody, there was a lot hanging on you with the Dalai Lama coming to the United States and end up in Kentucky, and you're the one planning the whole shebang. What's one of the things that you do with a process once something goes sideways? Can you explain to our listeners how you take advantage of that?
Well, let me back up just for 1 second, because as I've already said, we had 200 volunteers. And that's not even counting the 20 people that were on the steering committee who were all volunteering to be on the steering committee, who kind of put their lives on hold for 6 months to a year. So I don't want it to ever seem like I think I produced that event in a vacuum. I mean, me and 220 of my best friends. So that's really important. And I think, in terms of if something goes sideways, as we say, the most important thing to remember for myself and to communicate to the team is that is a breakdown of process. When something goes sideways, that's a breakdown of process. That's not a person problem, right? So if nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm really going to screw something up today, I'm going to drop the ball, I'm going to miscommunicate, I'm going to be, AWOL and something, whatever. So if something, quote, goes wrong, it's either, it rained and we weren't prepared for it, right? That's a process problem. That's a planning problem, right? I mean, you can go into 100 different examples of things that can go wrong. And I've got plenty of, don't ever think that nothing ever goes wrong in one of my events, right? And it was a process. It was a scenario that we didn't anticipate. It was, you name it. I can't think of one example where somebody just screwed up as a person and dropped the ball. There was always a missed opportunity, either on my behalf or somebody's behalf, to anticipate a situation and have a possible solution in the back pocket. And I don't know if your listeners might be familiar with Marcus Lemonis from the show The Prophet. Yeah, he talks about this, and he says we focus on people, processes, and products, right? And so you invest in your people, and the way you do that is you make sure that you have the right processes in place. And so when something goes wrong, and I've had situations where somebody comes to me and, oh, I'm so sorry, this is, and I always say, let's look at this and see where the breakdown occurred. Let's look at this as a learning opportunity. And you have to really believe that, because people can feel if you're speaking the truth, if you really mean that from your heart, that you don't blame them, and you really want to use this as a learning opportunity, because that's what's great about doing what you do. For how many decades have you been in your business, right? It's like we've had the opportunity to see these mistakes. And now, like I said, I've got this, 10-page thing, a lot of which is I learned this the hard way. I mean,
Amen, sister.
shame on us if we don't use that opportunity to make that list even longer that we're going to go through before the next event. So I think people can tell when you're genuine and you really do not hold them responsible for something that went wrong. And very rarely is it something earth-shattering. It's usually something that the client doesn't even know happened. Unless you have a meltdown, then they'll know.
Right. Yeah, that's very wise. So again, I want to touch on a couple of things she just mentioned. And one of the things I love about everybody I've had on my podcast, and you're no exception, Colleen is living what she's talking about. So did you notice how she instantly went to humility and gave credit to the team? She said, I didn't pull off this Dalai Lama thing by myself. And she said there were 200 volunteers and 20 people that were on the steering committee, and she gave credit to all those people. She could have easily been an egotistical leader and said, yeah, I pulled this bad boy off, and not giving credit, right? Not giving credit to anybody else. Colleen, I'd like you to talk for just a minute, because I know you're a big reader, and you're like I said at the outset of this, you are so well versed. You and I have talked about a myriad of topics, conversations, and you can hold a conversation on all of them. What have you done through your life to be so educated? And some of it's the experience, like building the little house. Some of it's life experience. Some of it's you intentionally going and finding wisdom or knowledge. What's been your path, and how would you recommend leaders do that to improve themselves?
Wow, that's a big question. I guess, I look at it from two different angles. One is, back in the day when I was a corporate person and I was reading the corporate leadership books, like Who Moved My Cheese and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And to me, those always felt more like putting on a suit or acting in a role, like, oh, this is how you play the corporate game. And I can do that. I mean, I did it, I did it pretty well for a while, but it never felt authentic to me. And I think now what I focus on, and I have for probably 20 years, is quote unquote personal development, which, of course it's for your personal life, but I think it also, all of it for me applies also in the business world. And I have to say, like, my favorite personal development book of all time, because I think it's I wouldn't say granddaddy, I would say grandmommy, since it's Byron Katie as the author, Loving What Is. Because, listen, if we can get that, if we can find ourselves and come back to an event, right, and something goes wrong, and our first inclination, our natural reaction is to say, this shouldn't be happening. This isn't how this is supposed to go. And that's what gives us the stress, because we're seeing a situation and we're thinking it should be different from what it is. When in reality, it's exactly as it should be, because this was the natural, conclusion of how this situation developed. So she does a process called The Work, and you can go to thework.org and download it's called the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. I've recommended this to so many people. And you basically question that stressful thought. You question the thought of whether this shouldn't be happening, and you turn it around and you say, no, this should be happening, and here's why. And you get to the point in your life where you're able to do this process almost automatically. It's kind of running in the background like an app on your phone. And instead of having the meltdown, you go right to the place of, oh, this should be happening. This is what's going on. Why is this happening? How did this situation end up the way it is? And what do I want to do in this moment? Because your only power is in this moment. To go back and say, we shoulda, woulda, coulda, or, next Monday when I'm doing the recap of this event, I'm really going to blast this guy. Like, it's a waste of time. The only thing you have to ask yourself is, what's the right next decision in this moment, right where we are right now? And then there's a time next week or tomorrow when that will be the time to ask the questions of, knowing what we know now, what would we do differently? So I would say that kind of vein of personal development, whether you call it mindfulness, whether you call it loving what is, it can sound a little woo-woo, but I can tell you it all works perfectly in a business environment, because it requires you to take responsibility for your role in the current situation and not waste a lot of time and energy covering your butt, if you will, or blaming anybody else. Not that I've ever done any of those things.
Right, right.
But to really take all of the energy and all of the resources and apply those to finding a solution in the moment and improving the process going forward. So I would start with loving what is. And I mean, I can't imagine anybody who wouldn't benefit from that book and from that process.
So, Colleen, it's amazing to me how when I talk to people, you're opening like a flower with all this wisdom. And this is another episode I would highly recommend everybody go back and listen to this a couple of times. We're going to put Byron Katie's the link to her work. I've been through that same process as well. Highly recommend it. We're going to put that in the meeting notes. But again, Colleen shares some very powerful things. We can't change the past. And one of the things that she said, and for those of you that are listening and not watching, and you move me, you move my heart, Colleen, because when Colleen said, people know if you're being real and genuine and if you're blaming them or not, she put both her hands on her heart. And again, this is what this is all about, right? Leadership and love. And when you put both hands on your heart, it's where you're coming from, right? You're humble. And you've really shown us that you're a humble leader and you gave everybody else the credit. And again, I like to not let this go by for our listeners. Colleen said something really important. And for me, I like to use the analogy, if you were sitting in a chair and I was to take one of your hands and pull it up, at some point, I'm going to pull far enough and the rest of your body's going to go. And my point to that is, as Colleen said, all the work that she did on being a better Colleen spreads into every area of her life. Not only her business, but her health, her mental wellness, her spirituality, her emotions, her relationships with family, friends. All those things are connected. You can't make one part of your life better with, what's that the old saying, right? The tide rises all the boats equally. And so whatever part you're working on being better is going to make everything rise. And so thank you for being so transparent and sharing what you've done on your journey, because it's huge. It's huge. And most people think, oh, it's not going to make a big difference. It does make a big difference. I'd like you to talk about, especially for leaders, what would your advice be? Because you didn't transform yourself. And literally that's what we do, right? We're in the middle of transformation if we're working on ourselves. What would your advice be to leaders? And I've come to understand we're all leaders. I don't care who you are or what you're doing, you're leading. What would your advice be to Colleen, to leaders, so that they can have that wisdom of patience? Because what you and I have done in our lives didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen on a weekend. It didn't happen in one retreat or a seminar. What would your advice be to them?
I don't know, Louie. This is, it's so funny. Of all the things you could ask me about, I think about everybody who knows me. Would they ever use the word patient to describe me? Probably not.
Right, well,
I know.
Well, maybe a better question would be then, what would you recommend for perseverance? Because it's, there's lots of times you could have quit, right? You're a single mom of a couple of beautiful children. You could have quit. You could have stayed in the corporate world. You could have not taken that chance, right? You've displayed great courage and perseverance. So what would your advice be for listeners around those two topics, courage and perseverance?
I think I look at it like, we've talked about this too, I think offline, which is, in a crisis, and I don't know if this is true or not. We'd have to ask somebody who grew up on a farm, that they say that, when the storm is coming, that the cows panic and try to outrun the storm. And the buffalo put their head down and walk straight through it. And I hope that's true, because I've used that analogy a lot in my life. And at some point, it doesn't even matter how slowly you're moving. If you're moving in a straight line and moving in the right direction, that's more important than the speed. And I've told myself this many times with the house that I'm building right now, right? My job isn't to figure out when the deadline is. Everyone keeps asking me, when are you going to finish? I'm like, I don't control that. All I can control is, am I showing up and doing the next thing on the list and being smart about it? You know, they say measure twice, cut once. Sometimes I feel like it's measure 17 times, cut once. But my goal is to not just be going in 20 different directions and wasting time and money and lumber having to redo it. So in terms of perseverance, I think it's a question of, you know, having that vision again, because there are days when I wake up and I say, remind me again why I decided to build this house. And then I have what I call the executive committee meeting with myself in the mirror. And I remind myself, this was not something that occurred to me one day. I planned this over several years and I have a very clear vision. So when I get overloaded or when I get frustrated or when, you know, the things have to be rescheduled or the contractor flakes on me or whatever, I go back to that original vision. I don't allow that particular day or that particular moment to make me think, oh, and be the cow and start running all over the place in the storm, right? So again, whether it's an event, a house you're building, you know, name any big undertaking in your life. The key to not losing the will and the interest, you know, because sometimes we can just start something and then we lose interest in it and we just kind of put it off to the side. I would guess that when that happens, it's because we weren't clear in the first place about what we wanted and how badly we wanted it. So if you get that straight at the beginning, you can go back to that when those crises hit, because there's going to be a moment when the backpack's over the wall and you're like, oh my gosh, now I got to figure this out. And I'm really not in the mood to figure this out. You know, I want that miracle. I want someone to like come rescue me in this situation. Well, they're not coming. It's up to you.
Yeah.
So you can go back to that vision board if you've got one, which I highly recommend. And now you can do it on Pinterest. You can do it a million different ways. But that's kind of the, you know, the come to Jesus meeting, if you want to call it that, whatever you call it, that meeting in the mirror with yourself, to remind yourself why you were doing this in the first place, instead of letting that momentary setback derail you.
That's very, very powerful. And I want our listeners to not miss this. One of the things she said, and she's very animated with her hands. You're a great speaker, but she's very animated with her hands. And she kind of did a karate chop. And she said, I'm just going straight forward. And she said something very, very, very wise. And I don't want you to miss this either. It's the little steps every day. Some days you might take a stride. Some days you may break into a run. Some days it's going to be tough to get up and move at all. And that's what she's talking about. This I use that term too. Come to Jesus meeting, and I also do a lot of stuff in front of a mirror as far as mirror work, right? Seriously, because it's very powerful to talk to yourself. But what she made this karate chop, and then she brought this thing back around to where we were talked about earlier, is the power of that vision. And this is what I like people to please don't let this go by. What she talked about with this straight line is every day, if you take action, at the end of the day, you can measure, did this get me closer to where I wanted to be, or did it get me further away? Did it keep me in the same spot, or did it take me sideways? And that's the power of that vision too, as well, right, Colleen? But I loved what you said. I love the buffalo analogy, right? You kind of put your head down and you just go into it. And it's a crazy thing. I'd like you to talk about this, because my experience has been that when I turned and faced it and went into it, and most of the time that's fear of some sort, right? I feared whatever was going to happen. I was going to fail. Somebody was going to make fun of me. I was going to be mocked or ridiculed, whatever it might have been. When we go into that fear, I've always found, holy cow, why'd I wait so long, right? What's the big deal? I spent more time and energy running from the fear than if I had been the buffalo. Right?
Yeah.
Right. If I had just been the buffalo and turned into it, I could have been past this shit years ago.
That's exactly right. And, you know, there are very few days where you get the big win. and you get the huge thing to cross off your list. I mean, I have a list this long on this house, for example. Very seldom do I actually cross the thing off. A lot of the things I do it in a spreadsheet, and a lot of the things have their own list behind it. So it's like, finish the framing. Well, there's 20 things that have to be done before I can cross off finish the framing, right? So, don't get addicted and don't be seduced by the idea of like crossing off these huge things and having a big day when like huge things are accomplished, because most days, are the small gains. I've seen Barack Obama talk about this when I think it was Jerry Seinfeld asked him, what sport is most like politics? Thinking he was going to talk about basketball or something, and he used football. And he said, because, most days you're just grinding it out. You're just trying to get an inch here or a foot there, and every now and then you see daylight and you can run, but most of the time you're just getting those, like the book that's really popular right now, Atomic Habits, right? It's those minuscule little steps in the right direction. And again, the direction is more important than the velocity, right? You're a pilot. You can talk about that.
Right.
Doesn't matter how fast you're going if you're going in the wrong direction.
Right. That's exactly right. That's a great point. Yeah. If you're doing 200 miles an hour in the wrong direction, I don't care how fast you're going. It's all a waste of your time and energy.
Yeah. You better slow down.
Yeah.
You actually should slow down if you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah. And it's amazing too, because I think there's real power in that. And I'd like to share something with you, because you're one of those people. This whole podcast thing, that's a story for another day. But when I thought, okay, I'm going to birth this thing and bring it into the world, I started thinking about my network, and I thought, oh my God, I have some of the most incredible people that are amazing leaders in their, like, and you're no exception, right? You're this amazing leader in this thing called event producing, and you're a rock star. I mean, they don't bring you in if they're doing the Dalai Lama if you're not a rock star, right? But all my network, and my point is, I want to emphasize for our audience, I want to really drill down on the point that you just made. It's the little things. I can tell you, I'm going to tap into my network for probably the next 2 years before I have to go outside my network for somebody to interview. But I didn't build that network overnight. I've built that network over the last 50 years. Right. And that was exactly your point. But now I've got this incredible network. I can reach out to people for anything and I mean literally anything under the sun, right? From personal development, spirituality, health and wellness, sex, everything literally anything. I can reach out to somebody that's an expert in that field, because there's people that are experts on sex. There's people that are experts on spirituality, health and wellness, business, marketing. The list goes on and on. But that happened literally over my lifetime.
That one of the things that occurs to me, because I've listened to several of the episodes, and you'll have to help me out with the woman's name, but she was the expert in marketing auto body shops, right?
Yeah, Mickey Woods. Yes.
Yeah, right. I listened to it because I was going to be on your podcast, not because I had a burning desire to learn anything about auto body shops, because how would that apply to my life, right? But what I learned in listening to it was, oh, she had some great ideas for marketing auto body shops that could be applied to any small business. And beyond that was the enthusiasm and the expertise that she brought to it. That's contagious. So what I would encourage people to do is be curious and be enthusiastic, because people love to talk about what they're passionate about. And if you're curious about what they're passionate about, they will share information with you. People aren't stingy with what they know. In fact, it's the opposite. It's like, if you show genuine interest in what they know. My mom sat next to the head of Merrill Lynch. He was like some senior VP, 20 years ago. And she has this great question that she asks people: what's the one thing I should know? And she asked him, what's the one thing I should know about investing? And he said, Vanguard 500. Well, that was a very profitable question that she asked him 20 years ago, and he wasn't stingy. He didn't say, well, you hire me and I'll tell you.
Right.
So just know that if someone is an expert in their field, like whether it's auto body shop marketing or anything, any field of endeavor you could come up with, they have knowledge and interests and passions and expertise that would be helpful to you and interesting to you if you would just be open to asking them about it. So don't shut down and go, I don't know anything about that,
Say that again. If you would be open to
learning about them and learning about what they're passionate about and asking them questions and be curious. So I think one of the worst things we can do is think, well, I already know everything there is to know about that, because I guarantee you there's plenty about event production that I don't know.
Right.
It's changing every day. Right. And I have to be humble and know that somebody out there, and it could be somebody with a lot less experience than what I have, but they have a different life experience, that they may have learned something that isn't technically event production that would help me and that helps them be a good producer. So, be humble and be curious about what other people know. And you can learn a lot just in conversations sitting next to someone in an airplane, in the case of my mom with the gentleman from Merrill Lynch.
Yeah. And again, she's dropped a big golden nugget. I can tell you that asking people is powerful because they're going to share it with you, because to your point, Colleen, it's what they're passionate about and they love to talk about it. And I mentor high school kids and I learn from them all the time. And what I like to reframe that question. This is how I use that question. I would add, so Colleen, and I'm going to use it on you. So
okay.
Okay. So this is how I form that question. Colleen, you've got 24 hours to live. You're going to die at this time tomorrow. What's the one thing? What's the most important thing that you'd like to share with all of humanity for eternity about being an event producer?
Wow. Okay. Let's see. One thing. I'm only allowed to say one thing.
Well, because just like your mom, right? I want because and for our audience, because if I get the best thing out of Colleen, and now that doesn't mean I couldn't get more out of her, right? People have come to me to be mentored, and I'll mentor them for free as long as they continue to do the work and take action with it, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't mean I couldn't go back to the well and ask for Colleen more stuff, but to your point on that chance meeting, your mom asked the one question. She got off that plane and never saw that guy ever again. She didn't get his phone number, his email address. They weren't going to be pen pals, right? That was a one-time hit. And that's why it's the power of this, because your brain, and it might take you a while because you've got all this information about being an event producer, but at some point you're going to go ding, and that's going to be the one thing. So I'll put you back under the hot seat.
So thanks for buying me a little time while my brain was calculating. Truly, though, it gave me a moment to think about it. But if there's one thing, I would say that if you think of event producing, you think of the bell curve, right? You've got the ramp up, and then you've got the big part of the event here where it's actually happening, and then you have where it's done, right? So you think of the bell curve. Most people focus all of their energy here in the middle, right? And so they skip over the part, like we talked about at the beginning, where they get crystal clear on exactly what they're doing and why. So every hour that you spend on that early stage saves you time and money in this middle part, right? And it makes sure that you're, to use the flying analogy, that you're headed in the right direction, you're going the right speed, you're asking all the questions up front that will save you the missed opportunities in the middle. So there's that part of the bell curve. And then over here, any person who's involved in any kind of sport can tell you how important the follow through is, right? When you hit a ball or kick a ball, you don't just hit the baseball and then put the bat down. You got to follow through. Right. And people drop the ball, not to mix my metaphors there, but they drop the ball on the follow through. So they have this big collapse as soon as the event is over, and they think, oh, that was fun, or that was this, or that was that, and now we're done. You are not done. You have 20% of the job left due in doing the postmortem, asking all the questions. What could have gone better? What opportunities did we miss? And you do this as soon as possible after the event, because you will forget. down to the minutia of, we should have had a garbage can next to this table. I mean, I'm talking that tiny, because if you do this event next year, or if you do any similar event ever, why have to learn that twice? And another big part of the follow through is what I recommend, which is a gratitude committee or a gratitude chair, or some person or group of people who are responsible for thanking the donors, thanking the sponsors, thanking the volunteers, and not just at the end, but all the way through this process. Somebody shows up to volunteer for 2 hours, they get a thank you note, a handwritten note with the event logo on it. I feel like that's a huge missed opportunity. So it might not be the sexy part of it at the beginning and the end, but it's the part that's so important and usually goes underutilized. So that's my nugget for you on what people are missing, I think, in planning, executing, and benefiting from the events that they're producing.
So thank you for sharing that. There's a couple of things I want to touch on. And you mentioned earlier personal responsibility. I want our listeners to know that to be a great leader, you have to take responsibility for yourself and what you're doing. The next thing is, I love your heart. I love your heart, because I'm about gratitude too, right? If you thank people, it goes a long way. It goes a long way, because to your point earlier, not only are they part of that bigger cause, but everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to know that they matter and they're making a difference. And there's I don't think there's a better way to do that than gratitude. The other thing, I'd like you to share the story with our listeners. And if you need some prompting, I'll be happy to help you, because I don't want to send you out on the skinny little branch. But I'd like you to share the story about your tactic in working with the volunteers, where you would block their time.
Right.
So
well, in a nutshell, it's under promise and over deliver. So my volunteers tend to think, I'm the best organizer ever. And here's why: because I schedule them for 2 hours. And when they show up, there's food, there's some kind of snack, there's beverages, there's music, there's an energetic feeling when they show up, and they get a job description of exactly what they're doing and all the tools they need to do it. But most importantly, I send them home after an hour and a half.
Say that again. So I want you to catch this. Say that again. You told them how long they're going to be there, and you send them home when?
I send them home a half an hour early. I tell them, you know what? If you guys want to stay, we've always got more work and more shifts, but you've accomplished what you signed up to do. So it's in a way a little bit of a sandbag. But the truth is, you underpromise, and you overdeliver. So if you show up for a 2-hour shift to volunteer, because let's face it, let's say it's a Saturday and you're going to go volunteer for 2 hours. You already have in your mind the things that you're going to do after that, the other things that you have to do on that day. Whether you're taking a long lunch hour to volunteer at an organization, or, it's a weekend, whatever it is, you have other things to do. And the worst thing you can do for a volunteer is to come up to them 15 minutes before they're supposed to leave and say, do you think you could stay another hour? They will never volunteer for you again. And they shouldn't, because you don't have it together, right? So you want them to feel like, oh my God, this was so much fun. We had music, we had snacks. I mean, grown-ups are no less impressed by a good snack selection than toddlers. Let me just tell you. And then I got my job done. I got a good feeling. I got credit for showing up today. I got to meet some new people, and we worked on something together. And then I got a half an hour to go do whatever I want to do. I mean, that if there's a secret to success of managing volunteers, that's it.
So I'd like, man, I'm going to say this because you and I could go on for the rest of the day. She just said something else that was brilliant. Some of the best connections, some of the best business connections I have ever made that exponentially helped me grow my business, I met those people volunteering. Mm-hmm. I used to slop beer at the Wakanda Rodeo, standing next to a bunch of other business owners, right? And so And what she just said was when you volunteer, you meet a bunch of people that you have never would have crossed paths with. So if you're not out there volunteering at and pick something that's near and dear to your heart, right?
Yeah.
Right? A charity or an organization that's doing something good and positive in the world. But that's very powerful because, again, you can meet some really amazing and influential people at a volunteer event or volunteering at an event. Colleen, I normally like to end with 2 questions, but you, the overachiever that you are, you've already answered both of them. I usually ask if you could recommend one book to our listeners, what would it be? But yours is Byron Katie, Loving What Is.
Right.
And you told us why you love your work and as an event producer. So I'd like to just give you the opportunity. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners before we go?
Well, I guess, we all, if you're a carpenter, maybe you see life as, a bookcase. I don't know. I mean, we all approach our life from a certain perspective. And I guess after being an event producer all these years, I kind of approach my life like that. Like whether I'm building a house or I'm cooking dinner for my family. I mean, really, it's all some version of an event, and I would just encourage people to, kind of take whatever it is that they love about what they do for a living and see how that applies to other areas. So we're not really setting our life up in boxes, right? Everything, it's kind of like the ball of wire. Everything touches everything else. So there are skills that we've developed in our personal life that are applicable in our family life, whether we're volunteering, our creative life. The idea that we have this, we could be a creative person in some area of our life, but we're not creative at work, that we're an accountant. And so there's no need for creativity. I mean, whatever skills we have that we've developed in one area of our life, we can apply and we can holistically use all of those skills in all the different areas. So I would just encourage people to kind of get creative and think outside that job box or that life box a little bit and, let those skills kind of overflow into their other areas.
Cool. Wise advice. So Colleen, before we go, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to talk to you about, you producing one of their events or some of the other wisdom that you have? What's the best way for our listeners to get a hold of you?
Well, I think you're going to link my website, orchestrate.biz, and
we're going to put that in
also my LinkedIn profile,
okay,
which is also LinkedIn Orchestrate. So I would love for them to reach out and, I might talk them out of an event if possible. If they decide they really want to have one and they're clear on why, then I would love to help them produce that.
Perfect. Again, Colleen, I really appreciate your time, your wisdom. Thank you for being who you are in the world and being a bright light. And I appreciate everything you do. And thanks again for taking your time out of I know you're busy building a little house, but I'm really, truly grateful. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, Louie. Congratulations on the podcast.
Thank you very much. I always like you to go away with something. Today, there's going to be a number of them, but one of the things I'd like you to go away with, how are you, if at all, investing in your team, in your employees, in your vendors, in your family? How are you investing in them on a regular basis? And then I'm going to ramp that bad boy up one more time, and I'm going to ask you, what are you doing to invest in you? How much have you budgeted this year to spend on you to make you wiser, smarter, healthier, whatever that may be?
Thanks again for joining us and listening to this episode of Leadership and Love. I would like to challenge you to ask yourself, what's one thing that you heard today that you can implement immediately to improve your leadership and accelerate your growth? If you've gotten value out of this episode or learned something that you can implement today, we'd ask that you please share it with those that you care about. Our goal is to create more leaders who are leading with love.